I want to show you, this is a map. So there's big Russia, Mother Russia, and here's Belarus, Poland, Lithuania. This is Ukraine, right? And so over here is the Donbass. Is this Crimea? I don't even know. But this is the Ukraine, just so you get, right? And so there's Spain, France, UK, just so you know where it is, Finland. So just so you know, I mean, because all of a sudden they always show me the close-up, but I'm like, well, where is that exactly on the globe? That's where it is, okay? And then down here, there's Italy, right? Oh, yeah. And then, and so right here, this is the Black Sea, and then that's the Azov Sea, isn't it? Isn't that what that's called? I don't even know, but I'm pretty sure that's the Black. So anyway, so there you go. So there's Russia, there's Ukraine, and they're fighting over here. So here's where they're fighting. There's how do you say Kharkiv? Is that it? Kharkiv, right? So they launched a major hang on, I gotta get rid of this. So they launched a major offensive, the Ukrainians, right? To get Russia, and it's actually working. So Ukraine forces break through Russia's front lines in the east and retake key towns. Okay, but look at. So I just want to show you. Here's a mashup of the headlines I put together. Britain says Russia has likely ordered troops withdrawn from Kharkiv. Ukraine inflicts major operational defeat on Russia as its forces retreat. Russia defenses crumble as Ukraine retakes key territory. Ukraine makes more gains, pushes back border places. In Kharkiv, towns liberated by Ukraine rejoice in a Russian retreat. But then there's this story. Ukraine's second largest city appears to be without power. So we're going to get to that.
They were rejoicing too hard?
They were rejoicing too hard. So here, this is like a GIF, and it's going to show you how on September 7th is when they started this offensive. And so here's how it started on September 7th and 8th. They started here, and then it kept going. And then on the September 9th, you see how it spread. September 10th, it spread. And then September 11th, which was yesterday, this is the Ukraine forces taking back over the areas that Russia had captured. And then that was it. So, and can you imagine how much better Ukraine would be doing, Kurt, if 70% of the weapons we sent hadn't vanished in this thin air?
Yeah,
Look how great they did with only 30% of the stuff we sent them. Isn't that
Imagine.
great? So here's, I mean, and they were saying this was a big waste of lives and money, huh, Jackson? I mean, look at that. Look. They advanced a whole sliver of territory. Isn't that fantastic?
What does the pink mean?
So the pink is where they're taking over. That's where Ukraine's taking back over.
Oh, I see.
And it only costs about $100 billion. And most of Europe will freeze this winter. What a bargain!
But we had to do
a bargain!
We had to do it to protect Europe.
We had to do it to protect Europe. So here's how ABC News is reporting this. Oh, I don't have my thing in. That's what she said. Okay, here we go.
Be a major turning point in the Ukraine war.
A major turning point in the Ukraine war.
Ukrainian forces retook significant territory from retreating Russian forces in Ukraine's east this weekend, and Russia now retaliating with new attacks on critical infrastructure and power grids. Tom Sufi-Burge is on the scene in Ukraine. Good morning, Tom.
Yeah, good morning, George. That lightning advance by Ukrainian forces in the northeast has continued. Overnight troops also now pushing right up to the border with Russia. And this morning, a stunning admission from Moscow that it has lost almost the entire Kharkiv region in a matter of days.
This morning, Ukrainian forces marking massive victories in the northeast. Their troops now controlling the strategic military hub of Izium, which was occupied by Russian forces for months. Now, videos circulating online show abandoned Russian tanks and military equipment littering the area. Ukrainian soldiers raising their flag once again over the city. It's a massive blow for Putin, And across a large swathe of territory, troops liberating dozens of towns and villages in video released by the Ukrainian military.
I think it's interesting that he says huge swathes instead of swathes. I just wanted to point that out. Okay.
And they
Emotional
said
scenes.
they just blew Putin. That's a weird way to
That's
put
a
it.
weird way to put it.
Civilians greeting and embracing Ukrainian troops.
Oh, look, they're
In
making
this
out.
map here, you can see the amount of ground Ukrainian forces have retaken in blue near the city of Kharkiv. Officials say they have reclaimed more than 1,000 square miles. President Zelensky praising his soldiers, saying everyone sees and notes your actions in the north, south and east of Ukraine. The world is impressed. The enemy is panicking. Ukraine is proud. The Russian military retaliating, with Russian missiles striking power stations and other civilian infrastructure throughout Ukraine. Backing Ukraine's military and key to its success, a vast army of volunteers, here making them clothing and kit. Mechanics turning civilian cars into military vehicles, and these volunteers making plastic artillery pieces. From a distance, they're realistic replicas, decoys to dupe the Russians.
Well, secret's out now.
Where did that
This
money
morning,
go?
the Ukrainians claim they are also
Wait, why are they MacGyvering weapons? We sent them all that money.
Right?
making progress in the south and on the offensive in the eastern Donbass. The Ukrainians are on a roll, and there is no doubt that US weaponry and intel have made this possible.
So let me bring in Jackson. He said the eastern Donbass, they are even rolling into there. So tell me what's really happening here. So let me put this up.
So the situation on the ground is obviously not how those on MSNBC or CNN or Good Morning America are painting it. What really happened is there are 4 staging operations of offensives that Ukraine is currently launching. There's one in the Kherson region that failed miserably, and Ukraine, sadly, because I don't think we want to see anyone die, lost thousands of troops in that. There is also an operation underway in the Liman region, which is south of Kharkiv, and that is failing as well. And there is another operation that's about to be underway that would be targeting Mariupol eventually. The only one that has succeeded thus far is the Kharkiv offensive, which is what we're discussing right now. And basically, what we saw in Kharkiv was over the past several months, the Russians had little to no reinforcements and Russian military personnel in the region. They had tried for quite some time to move out of this region and closer to Slavyansk, which would have given them a more beneficial positioning in the region. But they kept getting bogged down. So the Russians had pulled just about all of their personnel out of the region. There was just National Guardsmen, policemen, and a frontline picket of, Lugansk Lugansk People's Republic fighters. But overall, the Russians had pulled out pretty much all their troops. And when we saw the Ukrainians opt to stop their Kherson offensive at the direction of the commanders Zaluzhny in Ukraine and send all of their personnel to Kharkiv, Russia decided to withdraw all their personnel from the Kharkiv region and Izium, which is directly to the south of Kharkiv. Now, in that video, they said that Izium is a strategic military hub of the Russians. That's not true at all. It was not a strategic military hub. This was a region that they were keeping the lights on, essentially, in, but it's not strategically very important for the Russians. So they decided to pull out, and the Russians were able to get all of their military equipment out, all of their artillery and tanks out, though there's fake videos online circulating that tried to dispel that fact that they were able to get all their stuff out. And that begs the question, if they were able to get all of their artillery, tanks, and personnel out of the region without any haste or quick withdrawal efforts that left some things behind, then we have to assume that this was somewhat of a pre-planned operation. Obviously, sending 20,000 troops there caused the Russians to act quickly and decisively, but there was negotiations going on inside the Russian military that sources are now claiming were planning a withdrawal from this region, regardless of whether or not Ukraine launched an offensive there. So obviously, this is not good for Russia. They lost territory. They lost 2,000 square kilometers, but it makes up about 1/40th of all of the territory that Russia has gained throughout the war in Ukraine. Not to mention, the Ukrainians lost thousands of troops. They lost multiple brigades, which isn't the biggest problem for them because they kind of have an endless supply of men that they can send to the front lines, but they're losing their top fighting forces. The real problem here for Ukraine is, though this is a victory, it is a victory. They gained territory. That's objectively a victory. It's a strategic blunder now because of the fact that Russia pulled out of the entire Kharkiv region. Ukraine's men are spread extremely thin, meaning that these airstrikes that Russia is now launching in the region are doing quite a bit of damage. Russia hasn't sent in infantry in the region. And also, Russia has decided to respond now by what they discussed in there. We can discuss that more later. But the massive escalation of beginning to target civilian energy infrastructure, they knocked out about 50 to 60% of their civilian energy infrastructure.
So Russia, they didn't know this was coming, or they don't care that this was coming, or why was this allowed to happen?
So they knew it was coming, but they made a decision that it was not worth sending more personnel to the fight and potentially losing thousands of men in the fight to protect this region. And obviously that should be very frustrating to anyone who's watched this war, because we all know what has happened when Ukrainians retake territory that was withdrawn by the Russians, and there are reprisals that are going to take place.
They start killing people.
Does this also set up a thing? I mean, you're talking about strategically, like, isn't it like part of the strategy is to advertise back here? Look at, we just had a big success, so it's worth it to keep pouring money in?
This is that. I think that's what this is.
Like, that's their strategy. I mean, is that a bad strategy from their end to be like, even if it's a whatever kind of victory, but like, see, because the guy he actually almost credited the American weapons with retaking it.
Right.
You know?
Well, the New York Times did explicitly. They said that the intelligence sharing that took place at an increased volume right before the Kharkiv offensive was what led to the success in the region.
They should do a Vogue spread of missiles.
They should. All right, so
overall, it doesn't impact the outcome of the war. That's
right.
The final.
So
point
they retook a sliver of thing, and the American press is kind of blowing it up. And so, I mean, you should hear that they were talking about on the Sunday shows. And this is they said turning point. Is this a turning point in the war, Jackson?
No, it is not.
I heard them saying. Now then, I saw the smarter, like your Peters Hines or whatever, who were like, "Yeah, this is really great, but I'd hold off just in like the smarter people I could see." We're like, don't jump to conclusions yet, even though this is great if, you're rooting for this like it's a soccer game.
And I don't think we should necessarily jump to conclusions either. Anything could happen in war. War is full of surprises. And there are other offensives that are being planned. I think Russia's probably prepared, but anything could happen.
Okay. So anything we should add to this story, or that's it? So this big offensive, and you're hearing about it in the establishment press, and they're making it look like Russia's on the run, and Russia's is not going to lose this war. They're not on the run, and now they're taking out their civilian energy structure. I don't know why they didn't do this before, but they're doing it now. Why do you think they waited to start hitting their energy grid?
Yeah, that's actually probably the biggest development of all. That's getting no recognition because the Russians, like you said, aren't on the run. They created very strong borders along the Oskol River and the Seversky Donetsk River and the Russian border around Kharkiv, so they've contained that. But the big issue now is the fact that Russia has not only knocked out about 50% of the Ukrainian electrical grid, they also turned off the last reactor on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which provided Ukraine with about 60% of their electricity. Going into winter, that's going to be crisis level scenario for them. And Europe was actually relying on Ukraine, of all countries, to provide them with electricity because Ukraine was going to have an energy surplus this winter. So now Ukraine is trying to retake over the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. And because Russia's now meddling in the civilian energy infrastructure, something they hadn't done until now, they kind of did it the opposite way that the United States engages in war. there is talk from Russian military sources that what they just did in targeting the civilian infrastructure is supposed to be a display for further negotiations in the Ministry of Defense in Russia, meaning that it's possible that they change the official title of the special military operation, because this title and the legal parameters of it prevent Russia from targeting civilian infrastructure over and over again. So what they're saying is Russia might take this SMO to another level and normalize the targeting of the civilian energy infrastructure. And this first targeting that we saw, and we actually saw double taps on the energy infrastructure just a few hours ago after some of it had been repaired, is going to serve as an indicator for the Russian military as to whether or not they are seeing enough ramifications of this to merit the continuation of it. Because this is the only thing Ukraine's really got going for them other than Western supply, is that they still have their energy and they still have a lot of their supply routes. When you shut off the energy, not only does that impact all of their communications and civilian life, but also it shuts down all their electric trains.
Oh, look at that. Electric trains. I didn't know they had electric trains. Look at that. All right. Well, ignore what you're going to hear in the establishment press about how Russia's on the run and how this is a turning point.
This sounds like a thing to go, okay, we'll keep pouring money in, and yeah, you're freezing, but we're so close.
We're so close. We're going to do it. We're going to turn this around. Hey, come catch one of our live stand-up shows. We'll be in Spokane, Tacoma, Virginia Beach, Richmond, Arlington, San Jose, Miami, West Palm Beach. Go to jimmydorecomedy.com for a link for all the tickets and become a premium member while you're there.